Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into Dr. Atique Ur Rehman's incredibly gripping manuscript about the high-stakes window of time we are actually living through right now. We're looking closely at Future of Humanity 2025 to 2035, the embryonic decade. And look, this isn't just another casual look at a new gadget or technological progress. It's a unified, big-picture analysis of a massive planetary transition that is happening as we speak.
You know, there's a really fundamental vulnerability in how we usually try to predict the future. Technologists focus obsessively on capabilities. Political scientists focus entirely on institutions. And neither group really grasps what happens to the interior, everyday lives of normal people. Dr. Rehman calls this the silo problem. And honestly, it's exactly what this explainer sets out to correct by looking at the whole picture all at once.
Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll hit 1. The embryonic decade. 2. Mapping the three forces. 3. The accountability paradox. 4. The interface battleground. 5. When governance fails. And finally, 6. Escaping the determinism trap.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the embryonic decade. We're zeroing in on the 2025 to 2035 timeline.
Okay, to really understand the stakes here, we first need to unpack this massive evolutionary hypothesis from the text. It suggests we are literally being absorbed into self-regulating host organizations. It's called symbolic life. Basically, driven by this crazy exponential accumulation of information, humanity is transitioning into a totally new life form, one created through humans and technology combined. It suggests we're slowly ceasing to be purely independent individuals, and instead we're becoming, well, cellular components of a massive and eventually interstellar nervous system. Really let that sink in for a second. And the clock on our window to actually govern this, it is ticking incredibly fast. Just think about this rapid progression. We're talking about autonomous AI heavily integrated into knowledge work by 2026, which completely erodes the traditional premium on human cognition. Then, a single private entity practically controlling global communications density by 2028. Quantum computing potentially threatening all global digital security by 2030. And the serious threshold of artificial general intelligence by 2035. This is absolutely not science fiction. It is an active, ongoing engineering reality.
Moving along to Section 2, mapping the three forces, the moving pieces.
So, the crucial point here is that there are 3 massive trajectories in simultaneous motion, and understanding them is key to seeing how they're going to inevitably crash together. First up, the technology force, what is actually being built right now, and who holds the keys. That force is rapidly concentrating power while distributing access. Second is the governance force, our actual institutional capacity to make binding rules. And right now, it's fragmenting, totally losing the race to keep up with the sheer speed of software. And finally, the human condition force. This is the real, lived experience of everyday people dealing with a disrupted sense of truth and shifting identities as the world completely transforms beneath their feet.
Which brings us to Section 3, the accountability paradox. This explores what happens when AI meets a giant governance vacuum.
This is a terrifying intersection, right? Because when our democratic institutions lack both the public legitimacy and the sheer technical capacity to set binding rules, we get this massive regulatory arbitrage machine. Tech corporations suddenly become the default, completely unaccountable governors of your future, because regulators literally cannot comprehend these opaque, billion-parameter AI systems. Power just quietly transfers from the public directly to private entities. The result? Power without any democratic accountability, market-driven innovation without any human-centric direction, and systemic societal risk without any effective legal remedy.
Next is Section 4, the interface battleground. We are looking at what happens when this technology makes direct contact with the human mind.
Now, I really want you to remember this concept, epistemic sovereignty. This is essentially about having the cognitive tools shaped by your own values and priorities. See, the true battleground for human agency has moved directly to the digital interface on your screens. Ironically, the most powerful information processing systems ever built in human history are currently optimized mostly for advertising revenue, not for protecting our shared reality. Right now, algorithmic personalization exploits our deepest psychological vulnerabilities just to maximize engagement, which fundamentally erodes a person's, and frankly a whole nation's, ability to understand the truth and make sound decisions.
We are essentially looking at 2 drastically different futures built natively into the apps we use every day. On one hand, we have the cognitive leapfrog. This is the incredibly emancipatory possibility, giving a rural farmer or a student in Lagos unprecedented access to expert knowledge, empowering them to totally bypass historical constraints. But on the flip side, we have the dependency trap. And unfortunately, this is the much more pervasive commercial default. It's where AI writes our emails, does all our heavy thinking, and gradually substitutes for human cognitive exercise, meaning our mental muscles just permanently atrophy over time.
Let's pivot to Section 5, when governance fails. Here, we're looking at the true human cost of institutional abandonment.
The author strongly emphasizes that we have to ground this abstract global crisis in actual local realities, pointing out that the Global South will serve as the ultimate stress test for all of this. These aren't just hypothetical examples. When AI systems are trained primarily on Western English language data, people in developing nations are forced into an epistemological lens that is completely misaligned with their real, everyday needs. They inherit all the wild consequences of ungoverned AI without any voice in its design, which results in a total loss of agency for massive populations.
And that leads us to a really visceral, vital concept: digital sepsis. It explains how it's actually not just the technology itself causing the harm. Rather, it's the fragile social system's inability to absorb that disruption without tearing itself apart. Just like sepsis in medicine, where the body's own immune system violently overreacts and damages its own tissue, digital sepsis happens when an ungoverned technological shock hits an environment with really weak institutional immunity. The social system's dysregulated response, think of the crazy amplification of disinformation or mass unmitigated job losses, ends up doing way more damage than the technology alone ever could have.
When we break down the data, the exposure across different populations is just wildly asymmetric. While the global north absolutely faces severe strain, the global south faces potentially irreversible structural collapse. For example, if a labor protection policy fails in the global north, it might cause difficult middle-class displacement, but it's often softened by some kind of welfare state. But in the global south, where the demographic is super young and the social safety net is incredibly thin, a failure there means mass youth unemployment and locking in generational poverty. So, when you turn on the news and see these massive political shifts occurring globally, like surging populism, extreme radicalization, or people just totally withdrawing from the political process entirely, it is absolutely crucial to understand them empathetically. They are highly rational responses from everyday citizens experiencing total institutional abandonment. Look, when a society's institutions can no longer protect you from losing your livelihood, can no longer explain the confusing algorithmic world you live in, and can't offer any help for digital harms, walking away or radicalizing just becomes the logical conclusion of a completely broken social compact.
Finally, Section 6, Escaping the Determinism Trap. This is our fork in the road.
Okay, take a breath for a second and really consider this question, because up until now we've kind of treated this whole trajectory as destiny, which the author brilliantly calls the determinism trap. It is such a seductive intellectual error to map out these huge forces, see the unstoppable thermodynamic drive toward technological expansion, and just assume we have no choice but to be absorbed as passive cogs in a machine. But listen, confusing a trajectory with a fixed destiny completely strips away our motivation to fight for human dignity.
We absolutely have to separate what's inevitable from what is still up to us. No, we cannot stop the build-out of global computational infrastructure or the acceleration of AI development. But what we absolutely can decide is whether those massive new structures are democratically accountable. We can decide whether AI is carefully designed for cognitive scaffolding and human empowerment, or if it's just built for exploiting our vulnerabilities, to manage us and generate more ad revenue.
And here is the big, empowering takeaway. The decade between 2025 and 2035 is an incredibly active juncture where human values can still be hard-coded into the infrastructure of our civilization. Think about it. The internet's path was shaped by choices made in the 1990s. AI's path is being locked in right now, today. By pushing for international safety standards, demanding strict algorithmic auditing, and insisting on epistemic sovereignty, we have a narrow but profoundly real window to shape this entire system.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Because understanding this embryonic decade is really just the very first step in ensuring that you act as an architect of the future, rather than just standing by as a passive observer. So what's it going to be? Will it be unaccountable tech platforms quietly setting our cognitive defaults? Or will we push our institutions to adapt, making sure that this transition to symbolic life actually produces a civilization of expanded, incredible human capacity? The decisions are literally being made today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and please, pay close attention to the defaults governing your reality.